Hello and welcome back to I've Never Read Discworld with me, PJ Hart, and my co-host Andy Luke. Say hi, Andy.
Hello.
So, for those regular listeners, you may have noticed we took a little bit of a break over the summer after book 10, and we are both hopefully well rested, recharged.
That's
Did you have a
good.
nice summer holiday,
It
Andy?
was a great
Did you do-
idea. It's your idea, PJ.
It
Made
was.
me a bit more lucid about Reaper Man, which we'll be discussing tonight, because I think it's scheduling once a month can be a bit um
It's a lot. It's a lot to read. I find it a
yeah.
lot to read personally. Not just because I'm lazy and easily distracted, but also because of those things. Um, you know, kids, life, work, etc. You've been
Yeah.
busy with other projects, Andy. I know that. Doing some other radio stuff, cheating on me with your
Mm.
radio drama friends. I've been off working on a little thing for Radio 4 that I can't talk about just yet, but hopefully we'll get to mention in a couple of months. So anyway,
Interesting.
other projects aside, we're back in the
Yeah.
hot seat now for book number 11, which is,
Reaper Man.
so we're
Um,
back with death, one would assume.
yes, RM, Reaper Man, and we are Irish, so the Irish RM. Little joke for you fans of 1970s sitcoms.
Oh, that's yeah, over my head. Sorry, apologies, listeners and Andy. Yeah. So give me your dates. Give me the dates.
I think this was published in, well, Michael Ann's edition is 1991. Death is missing, presumed gone, which leads to the kind of chaos you always get when an important public service is withdrawn. Meanwhile, on a little farm far, far away, a tall, dark stranger is turning out to be really good with a scythe. There's a harvest to be gathered in. If you're an established fan, you'll enjoy this as much as the others. If you're new to Pratchett, what the hell took you so long? Why, thank you, Time Out.
There we go. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend starting with this one. I don't think Time Out magazine, but okay, if you say so. Uh, yeah, cool. Good blurb.
Can we talk about the cover art, which we usually leave to the end and try to not talk about? But I think this is Josh Kirby's finest effort to date. It's really clean. It's just really simple. It's a lovely piece of art, and it looks well as a book. You know,
Yeah, it actually interesting you say that. It feels a lot more like a traditional book cover in some ways compared to like the real busy kind of like, double page spread folded over a book kind of thing that he has done in the past. So yeah, I'm usually pretty down on the designs, but it's a good one, and there is obviously something inherently amusing in the image of death dressed up as a farmer with the dungarees and everything on. So you can't really go too wrong with that. So you don't need much more than that, I think, to make a kind of an effective humorous book cover out of this one.
yeah, all
But
the
it's also maybe
compositions are kept together. You could Death with Children on the planet, the blue sky behind, and the back cover is the planet, blue sky behind. And that's,
mm,
yeah.
we'll get to
That's
this later
lovely.
on, but I can't help but wonder, is there just like some of the big set pieces in the books previously that Kirby has liked to allude to or include details of on the cover are just too mental in this book, even for Kirby. Do you know what I mean? Like, what we're gonna get to, and you're just gonna be like,
Oh,
how
yeah.
would you draw that? So we'll get there when we get there, but like it'd be like Josh Kirby's take on Stranger Things is what we would end up with, I think, if he tried to like draw some of the stuff in the third act of this book.
The third act
So
is pretty much a Josh Kirby adaptation, really, isn't it?
I think it's too much, honestly, even for him. I think that's why we've ended up with the kind of stripped back cover, but we'll get there when we get there, as we always do.
Okay, so first impressions.
This will be interesting. I cannot recall if I read this book before, so that is probably not what you wanted to hear. I have this sort of vague recollection that, like, when I was first getting into Discworld, that like I didn't like the death books, and I was like, I was going to read the City Guard books. Weirdly, like I was like, I don't like Rincewind, I don't like death. Like, what do you like, PJ? You're supposed to be a Discworld fan. So I wonder, is that because did I get mixed up between this and Mort? Because there is a little bit of overlap in terms of subject matter with death, stepping away from the role, stuff like that. Or I think possibly more likely I might have picked this up after I read the Mort comic, and I was like pretty young when I read the Mort comic, so I might have picked this up afterwards and just bounced off it. I think there's kind of concepts in it, like the concept of auditors, for example, that I just probably didn't grasp if I was like, say, 12, 13 years old when I picked it up. So I might have just bounced off it immediately and then just decided that I wasn't going to read this one or that I didn't like this one or whatever. So that's basically a long-winded way of saying that this read is kind of my first impression, and I felt like underwhelmed's not the word, but it certainly wasn't a revelation in terms of like me filling in the gaps in my Discworld reading and looking for like, great new project material that I haven't experienced yet. Like this probably isn't up there. It feels like a little bit of a retread of Mort and a little bit of a retread of moving pictures. Not in any kind of particularly bad way, but not in any kind of particularly mind-blowing way, which is obviously a tall order. It's a big ask, but like, I mean, Terry Pratchett is certainly more than capable of blowing people's minds, just not my mind on this occasion.
Yes, I thought there was a bit of an element of Mort Part 2 in this. It takes a lot of the stuff that worked about Mort that maybe wasn't milked so much in terms of Bildor, and it also makes some of the mistakes about that Mort did in sort of overpacking the story towards the end. From the opener, it's clear Windle Poots is going to die, and it's a little bit picking up on the fate of Gaspode in moving pictures and following that. I wondered, was this written as a reaction to that editorial maneuvering?
He wants to finally get away with killing a beloved protagonist. Do you think he's? Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
I was quite sad knowing that was coming, but particularly as Windle is given much more dimensions, and he was in moving pictures. He was just a geriatric old madman and quite fun. But how he's really fleshed out.
Yeah, that really surprised me, and it's easily my favorite. Yeah, it is easily my favorite thing in this book. Is like, because I think I said it at the time. Moving pictures is one of the handful of Discworld books that I've reread the most. So I have this like really strong fixed idea of who Windle Poons is in my head, and like you say, he's kind of a comedy button character in that book. So to have him like fully fleshed out and be like a POV character in this, like I had no recollection of that for sure. And if I had picked this book up before, it would have been before I'd read Moving Pictures, so I wouldn't have made that connection anyway. But like, yeah, that if there is any kind of like revelation for me in reading this book now, it's to spend an entire story with Windle Poons as an actual person, rather than just kind of like the butt of the jokes, as he kind of was in Moving Pictures. So that was really cool actually. And the first appearance of the auditors, we're trying not to spoil anything, but like I've been quite critical, I guess, about some of the more Lovecraftian kind of elements and like the dungeon dimensions and like just, extra dimensional greeblies with lots of tentacles as bad guys for wizards are just like, eh. Whereas I know that like Terry has different angles on this. He's got more creativity to bring to that space, and the idea of the auditors who are obsessed with maintaining order essentially in the universe and making sure that like death doesn't grow a personality, and that obviously things can go wrong if that happens, as has happened in the past already in Discworld, is a good idea. I think there's something more memorable about it. I think there's arguably more comedy to be drawn from it, and like anytime one of them refers to themselves in the first person, they pop out of existence. I think that's quite funny. So I'm not sure how I missed that this was their first appearance. Obviously, again, without trying to spoil too much, they come up again later, and I obviously just accepted that. Whenever I got around to reading those books, I was just like, okay, yep, these are the universal bad guys. Cool. So yeah, it was really interesting to look back at their first appearance So there's stuff in this book I like for sure. Those probably being the two big ones.
I mean, you've got two really strong A stories built around characters, Windle and Death, who's just on this Western adventure as this
Yeah,
the stranger wandering into a small town, making friends and defeating the villain that is a combine harvester, the combination harvester. And
it's
then
quite
you've
fun.
got the whole odd egg trolley mall story, which represents the big finale on Windle's side. And this is where it got really vague and hard for me to follow. And the Fresh Start Club were great characters, but they were a bit confusing. Like
Yeah,
I had this problem in Mort that Terry was trying to do too many things, and this comes up again in these characters.
yeah,
So
I would
I have my gripes
agree.
on the subplots. And it is good to see cameos from Colon and Cohen and Albert and others. But the A plots, if we leave aside the supermarket trolley finale, the A plots are smashing.
Yeah, it definitely spirals out of control in a way that gets away from him. It feels like he's trying to do something similar. It's like a similar conceit to moving pictures, but like it's not as well formed, you know, in terms of like the cinema being this sort of extra dimensional threat, existential threat to society, I guess, on the disc, and then this vague idea that malls and there's I sort of get it that like the idea that the suburbs and malls and like shopping centers or whatever are represent an existential threat to cities and what makes cities vibrant and lively and stuff. And it's like, but I don't understand why that kind of comes out of this storyline about death going away. Like I think the connection to that is quite tenuous. So yeah, as a high concept, as a conceit, it doesn't quite land for me. It's got some bonkers imagery in it towards the end, like absolutely crazy stuff. That is like, yeah, I'm glad I read it at least once. So going back and redoing the series has been worth it, or doing this entry in the series has been worth it at least for that. But yeah, it spirals out of control. It doesn't feel as coherent as Moving Pictures did when it comes to the big kind of third act set piece.
Quite agree. I'm thinking I should probably show off my T-shirt at this point,
Oh,
which is a Death of Rats
oh,
T-shirt
nice. Yeah,
from the Discworld Emporium.
that is dope. Yeah, and gosh, I didn't even mention that. First appearance of the auditors, but like first appearance of the death of rats. Again, no idea how I missed that on my first reading. I think whatever, I guess probably soul music maybe. The next book where he turns up, I'd just be like, oh yeah, obviously there's a death of rats. Move on. Not even questioning what his origin story may or may not have been, because just like stuff like that exists in Discworld and you just kind of go with it. So yeah, it's good. It's nice to fill in some of these backstories and yeah. So without further ado, part one, Death is to be replaced and isn't keen on the idea. Wendell Poons celebrates his 130th birthday and dies. Comes back to life feeling better, but no one shares the sentiment. Dibbler finds riches in the stockroom. Sergeant Colon finds a hole digging faculty with celery. So yeah, I mean when you look at it like that, it is a bit surreal right from the start. This book, isn't it? I mean the whole snow globes thing that I think is meant to kind of lay the groundwork for this crazy mall story that's coming. It is quite out there. Yeah, so what do you like? I mean, I'm a fan just because I know what's coming, I guess, to a degree, but like in terms of these new villains on the scene, the auditors, like what's your kind of take on these guys as like a new kind of threat for death? Because it's hard to have a villain who can, you know, cause threat to death. Death is death, you know. So what's your kind of take on these dudes?
Yeah, the auditors and Azrael are very much putting me in the mind of those Marvel characters that are sort of very godly, like the living celestial
Mm.
in-betweener. Bit unfortunate name that. Um,
Didn't age well, no.
that are just sort of so far above. So I kind of thought it was an odd choice. There's something specific about Azrael that suggests this is a very powerful being who's got some say over how things on the disc happen, and that there's other beings of that power status out there. I know
Yeah, it's
we've
interesting.
had the gods, and
But yeah, this, like you say, this is something else. I mean, this
yeah,
is this is like, yeah, in terms of your comic book references, yeah, this is like celestial level kind of. And it's interesting. So it's like he's Azrael, which I believe, I could be wrong. I should have looked it up. The angel of death in the Bible, is that right?
yeah.
Or in the
So
whatever the Bible supplemental material. For me, it's just like he's he's the chapter master of the Dark Angels from Warhammer 40,000. Yeah. So it's a cool name, if nothing else. But yeah, it sort of feels like he's like the death of deaths. He's like the death in this, isn't he? He's death's boss. So he's death is the death of the Discworld, but Azrael is like the death of everything. I don't know. I don't feel it's like super well developed, if I'm honest, but it's good that there's a threat to death, obviously, that there's forces out there that can destroy him if they so choose. So that the story has stakes.
actually, I'll probably just bring up that cosmic lore because
Go for it.
yeah, I think you had it right on with the death of deaths. So it's from the folk at Pratchett podcast, Ben and Elizabeth, and reading around a bit myself. Azrael is a form of cosmic intelligence. Oh, that blew my mind a bit. There we go. It's me. Because I don't think I've seen anything bigger than Great Atuin. Um, so he is the Islam angel of death, so
There
death
we
of
go.
the universe. And myth says that he has billions of eyes, and one of these closes every time somebody dies.
Oh, that's
That's really awesome.
quite disturbing. Cool. Okay. Yeah, all right. So it's Islamic rather than Judeo-Christian. Cool. Um, Brilliant. Yeah, that is a great concept. Absolutely terrifying. And yeah, I wish I'd had that image in my head when I was reading it. I think that,
It's great, like the last out, turn off the lights stuff.
ooh, yeah, yeah, creepy. So, yeah, good stakes. I mean, it doesn't feel like it's really super well integrated into the rest of the Discworld lore. As you say, like we've established gods and stuff of the disc before. Don't really hear much from them. But all of a sudden we've got these big existential universe define threats. But we need them in this kind of story. We need them, so I guess that's okay. And we're back with the Wizards for 2 books in a row. And I mean, since Rincewind, we haven't really kind of hung around with like the same cast of characters for like 2 books on the trot so far, really, have we?
Well, moving pictures does so much groundwork for this. It
Yeah.
really resonates through this book that there's and honestly, I think moving pictures is possibly my favorite book now, whereas as it was in the top three before.
Mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm.
the stuff with the wizards here, it hits the ground running. The banter is there right away. um you've got the bait and switch around Windle's birthday party, and he's sure they've all forgotten it, and it's a surprise.
Yeah. Death
And
Day party.
you've got Windle, as I said, so much more fleshed out, and he evolves to be quite sympathetic quite quickly, pleasant company, and we're genuinely rooting for him, even though outside of, I think, the clock ticking and the sort of the sympathy for the elderly.
Yeah. It's an interesting one again because I just had such a concrete vision of him already in my head going into this. It's like he is surprisingly sympathetic, and it's such a weird goal for him to have. He basically just wants to die, like he wants to just be
Yeah,
done. But it's not like this super morose kind of morbid kind of thing. I guess because there's an investigative element to it, where like he does have a mission to go on. He does meet quite a motley crew along the way, and then everything just goes batshit crazy at the end. Like it is quite a fun journey, despite its ultimate aim. There is something quite sweet in yeah, like the fog clearing from his mind, and like he's rediscovering like walking around and being able to think clearly and being able to interact with people outside of a wheelchair and stuff and have full conversations with people and stuff like that. And there is something kind of bittersweet about that. That was obviously something he had previously and had lost. So yeah, he's like a pretty well-rounded character, totally shattering my previous kind of perceptions of him. So that was quite cool.
And this is quite a tight, well, yeah, quite a tight first part. It also lets the characters breathe quite a bit.
Yeah, because we haven't the more characters get added and added and added as we go, whereas this in this first section it's hasn't reached capacity yet. So yeah, I feel like there's a bit more breathing room here. Get to spend time with Windle, especially, and that's great. So you have questions about road diggers?
Yeah, what is it with root diggers? Just dig, 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 dig all the time. Dig.
Just yeah, just gives me flashbacks of Peppa Pig, Mr. Bill. I'm sure it's not on your radar at all, but for any other parents listening, it'd just be absolutely triggering, I'm sure. So
The
yeah, I like, and
academics
also
are trying to put Windle in the ground, and
it
it's
reminds
just
me, although trying to think of a cooler, more acceptable reference than Peppa Pig, it reminds me of Ghostbusters 2, I guess, where they're digging up the road and the cops stop them and stuff. Like wizards digging up the road has a similar vibe to scientists digging up the road because they don't give a shit about the chaos that they're causing because they've got a mission, they've got a knowledge has to be found. And I was just trying to think of the timeline on this. What predates it? 'Cause this came out in 1991 on
I'd really
the
like to hear from listeners who dig up the roads. Please answer
Ghostbusters. Yeah,
to us,
Ghostbusters 2 was out.
or
So
please
Ghostbusters
answer
2
us.
came out 1989. So I feel in this might be a Ghostbusters reference. But if, as Andy says, if you are a road digger, if you're out there digging up roads,
Are you
let
a
us know.
member of a secret society with an agenda? Road diggers, please get in touch.
Or if you're a Ghostbuster with a secret agenda, please get in touch as well.
So this is a fun working class element with going trying to deal with this mess, and of course Terry using his avatars to nitpick and misunderstand elements of lore like steak and celery.
Yeah. And like you said, it's nice to have Colon in the mix here as well. That sort of real world that, like, if wizards dig up a road in Ankh-Morpork, obviously characters we've met previously who are in the City Watch, that's going to become their problem, and it just makes everything feel nice and connected and whole.
Cool. There's one more element of part one.
Oh, it's tree time. No way are we
It's
cutting
tree
tree.
time.
No way are we cutting out tree time.
So today we're looking at Counting Pines, and from the novel, the only known example of borrowed evolution, Counting Pines altered their genetic code to adapt to outside forces. This unique ability has run into a snag when dealing with humans, however. When humans first started cutting them down, the Counting Pines assumed that they wished to count their rings, and so adapted by displaying their age in numbers on their trunks. Unfortunately, this adaptation led to them being nearly exterminated by the demand for exotic house number plates. So, from science.org, and credit to Reddit user Escapement, Counting Pines are a real thing.
What?
Yes,
Go on.
the woody vine Boquila trifoliolata. This is a chameleon vine discovered in Chile. Transforms its leaves to copy a variety of hosts native to Chile and Argentina. Like only butterflies, it imitates hosts, mimetic polymorphism. When the vine climbs onto a tree's branches, its versatile leaves can change their size, shape, color, orientation, and even the vein patterns to match the surrounding foliage. If the vine crosses over to a second tree, it changes, even if the new host leaves are 10 times bigger with a contrasting shape. The deceit serves as a defense against plant-eating herbivores like weevils and leaf beetles. It is unclear how B. trifoliolata vines discern the identity of individual trees and shapeshift accordingly. The vines could read cues hidden in odors, or chemicals secreted by trees, or microbes may transport gene-activating signals between the fraud and the host. There we go.
What? That is crazy. That I can't even. I'm really struggling to even like form a mental picture of how that works.
The woody chameleon vine, Boquila trifoliolata.
Crazy, crazy stuff.
All right.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to let you do the next bit just while I absorb that information. My worldview has just been irreparably altered.
So, book part 2, in which Bill Dorr is employed as a farmhand and ingratiates himself with the locals. The patrician assembles Ankh-Morpork's authorities. The spirit botherer finds her spirits bothered. At the university, the rite of a shank day is evoked. Windle seeks out the Fresh Start Club. Lupin deals with a robber, and Schleppel lurks. So
Yeah.
quite a jam-packed sequence this as well.
It's starting to pick up, yeah. Lots of more characters, like a lot more characters in this. I would argue double the amount probably than we would like to meet in such a short space of time, you know, between the Fresh Start Club, Mrs. Cake, and all the village people, as village people, you know what I mean, the Bill Dorr supporting cast.
Yeah,
It's a lot. Yeah. So yeah, where do you want to start? You want to start with Death, the Western, the man, the stranger coming to town, that kind of stuff?
It really is, and it's so incredibly, well, I thought it was nuanced. I've seen a lot of Westerns in my time, and I didn't realize until quite a way through the book that that's what was being done here, because it's not packed with genre jokes or any of that. It can be read quite subtly. So I really like that.
Agreed. I think it's nice. And we saw this a little bit in moving pictures, I guess, as well. Like some of those big American tropes are softened almost in Discworld because, you know, Terry put such like a distinctly English slant on them, I suppose. This may be one way to put it. So yeah, I think that's kind of what's going on here. I think it works pretty well. I like especially his interactions with the people in the pub and having to sort of consciously decide to be like bad at darts and bad at pool and stuff so that he can make friends. I think that's quite sweet.
Yeah, they've all sort of Duke Bottomley, Gabby Wheels, William Spigot. They're all a bit fleshed out to some level, and of course,
yeah, they have these stereotypical English names like Bottomley, like, you know, so that doesn't sound like a Western name. You know, I think that all helps like soften the tropes. Like, you know, it's just funny as well. And Mrs. Flitworth.
Mrs. Flitworth, and I think it's here her home is described as just having stuff all over the floor. It's like one of those charity shops. It just has items that were built prior to the 1960s.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very specific image of a very specific type of person, but I think we all have probably met an old lady like that in our time.
Yeah.
So it's very relatable for sure. And the idea that death lives with somebody like that is inherently funny.
Yeah, the two of them have got a combination that I think really works.
Yeah, because she kind of knows what's up, which is quite good, isn't it? She's like, yeah, you need to come up with a plausible name here, you fucking weirdo. You know? And that pays off so nicely then at the end when it's her turn to go, I guess, you know, and she has established this relationship with him and she's been wise to it all along, and they have that nice moment together at the end. Yeah, I like all that stuff a lot. The Bill Dorr name, I feel like I was aware of that, so I don't know if I got that maybe from just like, you know, reading around Reddit and Elspace and stuff, but you've got some thoughts about that?
Oh, well, again, another theft from Bed and Elizabeth of Pratchett, which is a builder.
Oh yeah.
Like he's building a new life here.
Mm.
Which what kind of over my head it went to. But yeah, you'll see that.
Totally. Yeah, that's good. He's good with, I mean, yeah, Terry's good with names, so it feels unlikely to be a coincidence. And one of my always love it. Again, trying to hold my tongue on spoilers, but I always love it. Death's interaction. This sounds dark, but it's not dark. Death's interaction with children, you know, and the fact that Sal can see the skeleton. Uh,
Skellington.
yeah,
Yeah.
and just it is really well observed. I wonder what age Rihanna was at this stage, but like the dialogue that the children, it's hard to write good children sometimes. It's,
Yeah.
again, weird thing to say, but Sal feels really well observed, just like based on my own crazy kids. You know, I was like, yep, I can see my kids getting on like that in the face of a skeleton. So I love those bits, and obviously, you know, there's an emotional investment and payoff later on when Sal's put in danger.
Sal does something depowering to Death slash Bill because Sal's a child. That remains in place. Yeah, those are really fun scenes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I see what you're saying. I see it in your notes here. Sorry, just jumping to talking
Okay.
about Mrs. Cake. Mrs. Cake is a good concept. It's a good idea for a character that I think is significantly underutilized in this book. She's like terrorizes all the religions, I guess, by being like too into it.
Yeah.
That's I mean the conceit isn't like crystal clear to me, but that's the gist, isn't it? That she's too into it, isn't she? What is it? So she asks like too many questions. So she gets so in any given religion. If Mrs. Kate comes along, she's gonna get so into it that she's gonna find all the loopholes, or she's gonna kind of pick apart all the contradictions. She's gonna ruin your religion basically by being too good at it. Is
Well,
that
she's
that is that
yeah,
your
she's
understanding?
the very apotheosis of the Godfather, but in a fresh take.
Yeah, so I mean, like, yeah, as you know, kind of a fairly dyed in the wool atheist or whatever, but with an interest, having an interest in various mythologies and whatnot, I find that to be an idea with quite a lot of potential. But we don't spend a great deal of time with her, and don't actually really get to see her interact with any of these religions. It's more like it's this running gag where the representatives of other religions are just like, "Oh shit, Mrs. Cake," but we never really get to see her interact
Yeah,
with them. So
there's a little legend aspect there, isn't there?
yeah, and even like the priests that are like in the Indiana Jones style
Yeah.
dungeon temple later on are still like even they know about her, and that is funny. But I hesitate to say I would like to see more because there's already way too much in this book already. But like
Mm.
I think she maybe deserved a place in another story where she would have had a bit more room to breathe and operate. But I mean, well, what a problem to have. There's too many good ideas.
So you've got a note here about One Man Bucket. I
I hate to
couldn't
do this.
really connect with One Man Bucket at all.
No, and it's part of the Western trope, I guess, going on. You know, there's a bit of a Native American thing, and there's allusions to him having a drinking problem, which isn't ideal for sort of stereotypical reasons.
Mhm.
And he does like, yeah. I don't. I'm gonna stop bringing these up eventually because, like, you know, the books are of a certain time, and even when Terry does kind of walk a bit close to the line in terms of cultural tropes and archetypes, like there is always something that kind of undercuts it. There is always something that kind of makes it not totally one dimensional. And even with One Man Bucket, like he's kind of doing his shtick, but his cultural shtick, the Indian thing, is performative. Like he slips in and out of it, and so he isn't as one dimensional a character as he might initially appear. So I don't be hypercritical about it or whatever, but it still doesn't sit completely right with me, I guess. And again, it's just one idea too many. It's like there's just so much stuff going on here. Like the spirit guide thing. It doesn't really I don't really know what it adds.
I think we're quite in agreement with this, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Um,
So we're eventually I'll stop. I'm nitpicking here big time, like, you know, as I say.
let's keep it going.
Yeah.
The Fresh Start Club, I think, got off to a cracking start. Like, but that's sort of being exposed to their setup and not knowing that Terry's going to have to mobilize all these different characters
Yeah.
later on.
So
It's a novel concept. They're quite enjoyable. People, Red Shoe
yeah, I
just
think I
comes.
alluded to it when we were talking about pyramids, maybe, you know, that zombies would be afoot, and I was thinking about rage. So again, so this is the third big kind of character, I guess, in this book that I didn't realize this was their introduction. Yeah, he's good. It's a fun concept. I think Schlapple is good. I love Lupine or Lupine or you know, the idea of a dog that turns into a werewolf instead of a person that turns into a werewolf is brilliant. I don't particularly like the vampires, the working class vampires.
Really, me
pretending to
neither. Me neither.
Yeah, I mean, there's stuff. I mean, if there's pipe being laid there, that it's going to get better. It's going to come later. All you have to do is cast your eye over the titles, the book titles that are upcoming, and you maybe get a sense that there's going to be vampires again. So I think he's noodling with some stuff that's going to come back in a slightly more coherent form. Yeah, like you say, there's stuff, other characters that just don't really exist beyond these early scenes, like Mrs. Drull, Mr. Gorper, whatever that is. And then, like, what's going on with this Banshee? Because like the Banshee is called Ixolite or Ixolite. Like that sounds like Mesoamerican to me. It's not Irish. I mean, if I can say for sure, it's not Irish because there's no X in Irish. Like when you write Irish in Roman alphabet, you don't use X, right? So it's not Irish, and banshees are just unequivocally Irish mythology, right? So this just feels like wrong. I hesitate to just say that so flat out, but like this is wrong. And there's something kind of funny in like the banshee giving him notes, and the notes just say "woo." Like that's funny, but like why isn't the banshee Irish and why isn't the banshee a woman? Like those are literally the two things that banshees are. And the third thing is ghosts. So yeah, so that was kind of the icing on the cake for like how unfocused, I guess, to me the Fresh Start Club felt. But
sorry, one of the problems I had with them were just there's so many to sort of try and keep an eye on, and it kind of overshadowed the two scenes after that, which were based around Lupine and Schleppel. And it kind of, particularly with Lupine, it detracted from my appreciation of him because I had all these other characters in mind.
Yes. Yeah, because that's such a good idea, but
a lot.
Yeah, it's such a good idea, but it can almost get lost in the shuffle here of all these extra characters. But yeah, Lupine, Reg, and Schleppel, at least, you know, you've got a core cast of 3 within that group that are totally worthwhile and are really fun and earn their place for sure. The rest of it feels like, you know, a collection of things that are maybe being thrown at the wall to see what sticks. Some will come back in other books, others won't. Definitely want to know what the deal with the Mexican Banshee is. If anybody knows, maybe I've got it totally wrong. Maybe there is a similar myth in Mesoamerican mythology, and if there is, please let me know. Share it with me. Bill is disturbed by Mrs. Clitworth's clock, by dreams, dead rats, and a small child. An act of heroism leads to confrontations with mortality, and the blacksmith is called upon. Mrs. Cake knows things. Modo the gardener finds a trolley, and sauce is applied to a particularly nasty compost heap.
Thank you.
All this stuff with Modo as well. I'd almost even forgotten about that.
So my synopsises are fairly clean because that's the way this book is structured. It's quite well compartmentalized, so you could be reading 25 pages about the wizards and then 25 pages about Bill. And Pratchett doesn't often do that, and I think it works really well here.
It does. I think it's the only way that to make sense of this narrative, because he does have so many moving parts. And yeah, I think I like it. Yeah, I like especially the time spent with Bill and Mrs. Flitworth, like the idea, because it just makes it feel like Death really has separated himself. You know, because as you say, you get to spend 25 pages with him in this normal life on the hoof, and that makes it feel really tangible. Yeah, those bits are great. This is, I guess, you know, the foundations of the death of rats, all the dead rats coming along.
The fire occurs, and
right, yeah.
go in and save Sal. And I think
And I think
kind
it's
of had a,
genuinely on the clock. It's genuinely like up in the air as to whether he's
oh
going to do
yeah,
anything. You know, like it really feels like he's not going to save her. And we like he's death. Like why would he? Like it really like when you're talking about like when it feels like Gaspode is dead, you know, in moving pictures, like here, like shit, he's not gonna save that kid, which is like a big swing narratively. Obviously, he does something, but it's not like a clear cut hero moment. And you know, Sal's living on borrowed time, and there's complications involved in that as well. Oh yeah, the other thing that like really humanizes, ironic to say that humanizes Bill in this section. Like I love the dream sequence, and I usually don't in books, you know, because you can kind of see him coming, and you're like, oh yeah, some symbolism, wow. But like, it's quite heartbreaking because it's like the first time Death has ever dreamt, and he doesn't know that he's dreaming. And the auditor comes and tells him it's all been a mistake, and he can go back.
oh yeah.
And then he wakes up, and it's a dream. But because he's never experienced a dream before, it hits him so much harder. And I actually found that like quite emotional.
I think this whole section of death becoming more Bill Door, like so this was first explored in Mort, and it does a lot for my problems with Pratchett's death. In that, you know, I've already come through Gaiman's death, who is
Hmm.
just fantastic. Dee Dee, who in High Cost of Living, I think it was revealed once every 100 years, Death spends a day on Earth as a real person. So we're in similar territory. And of course, Pratchett and Gaiman have just
Yeah, good
released
point.
Good
Yeah,
Omens
that's
about
right.
this point. So Death, because he's so visually typical, he's a skeleton in a hood with a scythe. You know, he feels quite problematic and quite stereotype and quite cold as a character.
Hmm.
But he's genuinely funny here. He's explored that Harry's House of Harga ribs path.
Yeah, that's still my favorite part of Mort.
So we get a Death that's belligerent. He's got dry wit. He thinks he's smart. He's smarter than he is. He's a bit condescending. And in Bill, he's got feelings of compassion coming through. He can be quite likable. And as we'll even see at one point, he's jealous of us, of what our lives are
Mm.
and our bravery. And there's some guarded yearning for that.
Yeah, and that's the problem as far as the auditors are concerned, isn't it? Is that he's developed this personality, and that's they don't want that. You know, death should just be death. So I guess for that to be, since that's kind of the inciting incident of this story, it's really good that he sticks with it and actually puts his money where his mouth is and shows that stuff and develops Death as a character. The oh man, the weird trolley stuff in this section, like this, really threw me. It's like, what the hell is going on here? Like the snow globes is one thing, but the trolleys, how'd you feel about this?
Yeah, so it took a couple of minutes to translate from steel baskets moving on wheels to supermarket
Shopping
trolleys.
trolley,
Right, we're going there.
yeah, yeah, same.
And always fun supermarket trolleys just running on their own free will or whatever.
There is something, for whatever reason, inherently funny in the shopping trolley as an object.
Yeah.
That I will absolutely concede that. I don't know about your neck of the woods, but my neck of the woods, there will perpetually be a shopping trolley living in the waterworks, which is the park beside my house. It has a big pond, two big ponds, and it's just like a fixture. Like there will be at least one shopping trolley in at least one of the ponds at all times. And you never see anybody put one in. You never see anybody take one out, but it's not always in the same place. So I get it. Like I mean, you know, shopping trolleys they pop up in funny places, and it is inherently amusing. But like,
Yeah, there's and even just there can be something funny about a lone shopping trolley, even on the in the parking area, just sitting out there, and you know, it evokes like some sort of eccentric rampant child has gone mad, or maybe some disenfranchised former promoter like Jim McGaw, for those of you who remember Jim McGaw.
it's a deep cut.
He was into his love for those crazy prices. Um,
That is a deep cut. Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's yeah, like
Abandoned Shopping Trolley Hotline, I think, is a Radiohead EP.
oh wow, I didn't know that. To like, so I get where he's coming from. I think the way he introduces it is a little bit too clever. Like you say, it took me a while as well because we first meet them in the garden, and it's like, oh, Moto has got this basket on wheels. I'm like, well, what is it? Is it like one of those little gardening trolley, things, or like what? What is this? And then when they appear other places, like, no, that's not it. Oh, it's a basket. Oh, yes, okay, it's a shopping trolley. So yeah, maybe it's just me being stupid, but it definitely took a lot longer to click for me than perhaps it should have, and it was becoming a distraction. There's already so much going on in this book that that became a slight issue for me.
Yeah, snow globes to eggs I can see, but eggs to shopping trolleys and how this relates to the removal of death.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's all meant to be coming out of an abundance of life energy. I don't know. I don't get it. I don't. Maybe somebody can write
Ah,
us in and tell us what the conceit
that
is. But
sounds a bit contentious because this is clearly sort of an anti-capitalist bit of tract here. But so
yeah,
we're saying that life is commerce
I
and
don't know.
trading?
But that is so like yeah. I mean, I don't think we're ever going to get to the bottom of this. But like,
Yeah.
so there's no death, and so there's too many. The spirits are building up, and there's an abundance of life force. The harvests are all really big. The life isn't going anywhere, and that seems to prompt the birth of all these snow globes, which in turn leads to the shopping trolleys, which in turn leads to the malls, and that all is all connected within the story. But I can't, for the life of me, figure out why, like what the conceit behind that, like what's he trying to say with that? It doesn't have a thesis in the way that the moving pictures Hollywood stuff does. So I don't know. It's a bit mental. It is quite funny in places, but it is definitely way over my head.
Yeah, the trolley stuff is quite absurdist in a very Python-esque thing of which Pratchett seems to be the
Yeah, that's
next
true.
logical step.
I could
And
just be overthinking it.
I'm wondering with that whole supply chain, is Terry envisaging Reaper Man going out to the printers and into the lorries, into the bookshops, and the
Into the
whole sort
shopping
of
trolleys.
the shopping trolleys, and that whole um, chain of all the steps that happen.
Yeah, it's a bit. Anyway, yeah, we can come back to it. I see you obviously invested heavily in your Death of Rats t-shirt, and you're disappointed in the minor role that he
Yeah,
plays in the book.
he's quite tiny. Yeah,
Yeah. It's a really like I can't believe I didn't know this was the origin story, but yeah, don't worry, you'll get a chance to refer back to the Death of Rats in other episodes. So that was cool. That's another origin story ticked off the list for me. The compost heap. I mean, there's just so many weird creature battles in this book. From this point on, it kind of begins here, doesn't it, with the compost heap,
yeah. Now, this is another
and then
bit
it just
that
gets
doesn't make any sense, but it's fun. It's really fun here.
yeah, because it's a comp. Well, yeah, it's very loose, isn't it? It's a compost heap, so it is alive. Like they have worms and stuff living in them, and because there's an abundance of life energy, it starts moving around. But like, why is it trying to eat them? It's trying to eat them or something. Yeah, I guess it does kind of start to break down a little bit there, but it's good fun. It's good to see wizards
You did a
actually
pun
like,
there. Compost heap breaks down.
hey, yes, indeed. But yeah, it's good to see wizards actually like fighting stuff with magic again, because I know we only got a brief
We've
glance at
actually
that in
had
moving
quite a lot of
pictures.
wizard fighting, but I think this is one of the better ones.
Yeah, and it's been a while. It's
Yeah,
like sorcery, it was all a bit too big and a bit too apocalyptic. I mean,
it was
a couple of
Hollywood sorcery. Yeah, it was.
yeah, and then yeah, moving pictures with the 50,000 foot women or whatever, and then yeah, give me some dudes throwing fireballs at a compost heap. That's a bit more grounded. It's a bit more fun,
Yeah, do you think that this works better now that we know these wizards' names?
or at least their roles. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
just that continuity, because I know that's something I complained about at the start, is that the revolving door cast of wizards was kind of a gag. The whole point was that like it's hard to survive as a high level wizard because like somebody's always coming along trying to take your place. Whereas, and that's fine for a gag in a book, but like if you want to build this world, which obviously Terry does, and you want to revisit the university as a precinct within that world, it needs to have a coherent cast or a consistent cast. And I think it's really nice to see essentially the exact same group from Moving Pictures again here.
Yeah.
And it's the book is. I mean, imagine if we were like meeting another Arch Chancellor again. You
Yeah.
know, it would be our
Very
fourth or
much.
whatever. Uh,
Moving
and
pictures really is a power bencher for,
yes,
it,
for
it
sure.
sets up so much of this.
And
So much of this.
Ridgely, I guess, continues to come into his own as kind of the
Yes,
no
Rid Cully is
nonsense.
really, really fun here. I really
Yes,
got Rid Cully and the Dean, who is
yeah,
just all in gung ho at this point, and now those two continue throughout the book, just
yeah,
being a bit Rambo on it.
yes, it is, and it's again with trying not to spoil things. It's a concept that returns stronger later, and I think anyway.
Oh, good.
So yes, Dean going Rambo is it is good.
We got Schleppel being asked to keep under the table. Schleppel's a bit of a one note gag, but a really good one note gag.
Yeah, I like it when he goes mobile with his own door later on, and and I like that he kind of actually gets to sort of save the day to a certain degree as well.
And again, we've got that thing where Terry is employing the trick of having different characters working on different pieces of the puzzle that they'll all bring together in the end. We've had that at a few books before, and it's always worked well. So
Yep, absolutely. I mean, I think it works slightly less well here, possibly just because there's too many, maybe like a thread, one thread too many coalescing for this, and also it's just about to get absolutely crazy with them all.
right.
But you know what I mean? I mean, I don't feel like there's as like if that stuff wasn't there, I don't know. I'm really on the fence about it because I do feel like it goes too far, but there are a lot of elements of it I like. Whereas, you know, the final act is really driven by death, by the whole Bill Door versus the new Death kind of storyline, and then whether Death gets to retake his post. That's when all the life force dissipates, and that's ultimately what saves all the other characters, and that's ultimately what allows Windle to die. So all the business with the mall, you know, if that didn't happen, would it really have much of an impact on the
Mm.
rest of the story? I don't know. And because it is just a little bit on the abstract and a little bit on the crazy side for me, I sort of feel like I'd live without it. But
Right, yeah. I mean, because Wendell's story isn't so much it's tied to Death's story in a way, but it's free to go its own direction.
yeah, exactly.
I
And then, I
think
mean,
the
this is the
mall stuff
direction
is just
he
where it gets out
chose,
of
and he's
control.
got something he wants to say about this stuff, and that's fine. But it didn't land super well for me, I guess. The new Death is an interesting one. I guess it's worth talking about too, because that is obviously what a lot of the AA story's building towards.
There is a seance. The Dean goes into battle. The city is alive and has predators. Bill Dore competes with a combination harvester. Music sweeps Ankh-Morpork, if you could call it that. Mr. Dibbler isn't trying to sell anything. Windle Poons and the Fresh Start Club enter a subterranean hellscape. Meanwhile, Bill Dore faces death at high noon. Ned Simnel is not to be trusted.
So indeed. The city is alive and has predators. This feels again a little bit. I feel there's like Neil Gaiman overlap here, isn't there? Like is there a Sandman story about cities being alive as well, or like cities having? I could be wrong. Should have researched
Yeah,
this.
this sounds a bit like the Ramadan story, or
So
actually, it's in that sort of arc from about issue 50 to 56. It's a different city at night time, and
oh yeah, yeah.
um,
There's something. There was something lurking at the back of my head there, and it's an idea that I like. I mean, I'm from a city, not from a big city, you know, and you are too. And like, I think there is something to be said. There is a certain magic about urban areas, about living in a city, and the about society and people coming together and all that kind of stuff. And obviously, it inspires a lot of stories, inspires a lot of myth. So the idea that like cities can be killed is interesting. The idea that they're killed by shopping malls is very 1980s slash
Yeah.
1990s, which is fine. This whole bit kind of reminds me of Stranger Things, I guess, where they have the big Stranger Things spoilers here for anybody who cares. Have the big fight with their particular extra dimensional monster in a mall in series 3 or whatever, and it all feels very very similar to this actually, in that it's all gross and wet and there's like living tissue everywhere, and like whether you buy into this or not, like he does describe it quite well, doesn't he? Like it is pretty creepy.
I was really entranced by this sort of idea that, yeah, cities can be infected and infested. Cities can breed. And there's this whole metaphor going on for the destruction and death that commercialization can cause.
Mm.
It's an action by the lack of death, a form or facade of life.
Yeah, I mean, if
But
you were telling this story now, I mean, what's killing cities now?
yeah,
Landlords, I guess. You know, like nobody can afford to live in a city anymore, but they're not going to the mall either. So, like, what, this story now would be, I think it's a story that can still be told, but it would be told in a different way. There would be a different villain.
I think I must have got at some level what you were talking about earlier, because I've got in my notes here about our own sort of interactions with capitalism, and
Hmm.
that is a form of life. You get that thrill when you're shopping, when something
Yeah.
new has arrived, and it's kind of a facade, but it's also genuine. And is that a two-edged thing? That buying and selling makes us feel alive, but then we get to say a bigger brand, Coca-Cola, take an example, where you've
Hmm.
got murder associated, you've got obesity, you've got drought, and we could pick any of the larger named corporations and find these gross deprivations,
Hmm.
and we stress out if we don't have the supplies we need at home.
Mm.
And you've got then the whole element of poverty, which is psychological. And a small, we're both sole traders or
Mm.
freelancers, and with not necessarily with contracts of death, probably not with pensions for underneath us. We'll work to the
Yeah,
point of sickness to look after ourselves, and in your case, your family. And
indeed.
but the capitalist machine kind of teaches us to sort of ignore those sole traders, to gravitate towards the big labels.
Mm.
I've been
Yeah, and
getting
that,
very
yeah,
thoughtful when I put that down.
and there, yeah, yeah, no, and there. I mean, trying to think back, I guess, putting yourself in that kind of late 80s, early 90s mindset, where like these malls were been popping up, all your Westfields and things like that all over the UK, and they were all identical, weren't they? And they all had the same shops in them and they all had the same layout and stuff like that. So, yeah, the idea that these things are, as you say, they're papering over what makes cities unique, the sole traders, the little bookshops, instead of going into the city and seeking those things out, you just drive to the suburbs and you go to the mall and all the stuff is there exactly the same as if you drove to a different suburb outside a different city. So yeah, there's definitely something in that. It was definitely a very specific anxiety, I think, specific to that time and specific to creative, well, not solely specific to creative people, but like certainly something that would be causing anxiety for creative people, I think, at that time too. So yeah, nice little snapshot
And do you
of.
feel like me that this is fairly straight and at the capitalist track? There's not much subtlety in it. It's fairly sort of saying there's unregulated, that capitalism is dangerous.
I don't.
We're not
I mean,
overstretching to arrive
yeah,
at that.
certainly commercial. Certainly, this level of commercialism, certainly the specific type of commercialism. I think that he's definitely critical of that. I don't think. I think he's always quite careful not to make the really grand, sweeping
Yeah,
political statements. In fact, he is occasionally quite critical of movements that are too grand and too sweeping and lack subtlety, and
yeah.
so. Yeah, I feel like it's maybe slightly more specific criticism than that, but I mean, obviously what underpins the kind of rampant commercialism he's criticizing is capitalism. And again, I think if this story was being told now, when we're 30 years further into the late stage of capitalism, I think it would be harder to ignore that than it was in kind of the early 90s or the late 80s, say. So yeah, I think it has to be kind of taken of its time. Where does that leave us?
You mentioned Bildor versus New Death, and that's quite a fight. That's quite a big climactic.
Such a big Western moment coming to a
Yeah,
head, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, it's quite well described for visualization.
Yeah, which is good. And I don't know how I feel about New Death because, like, it's tricky conceit because the auditors are obviously, well, actually, I think there is maybe something a bit clever going on here than I initially realized because the auditors, they're like trying to strip all personality away from this kind of all these goings on, like death should just be death, and they're the auditors and they shouldn't have personality, and death has personality, or death shouldn't have personality. But the auditors keep accidentally developing their own personalities, and a new death still does have a personality. It's just kind of a shit one. Like there's no reason for
Yeah.
him to have a horse at all. Never mind a skeleton horse. There's no reason for death to be a skeleton or to hold a scythe. Like there's no reason for any of this. But it's inevitable that death manifests in that way for some reason. So like, I think it is. Yeah, I think he is trying to say something about that because it is kind of set up in the first encounter with the auditors that the personality is inevitable when it comes to these things, and that's ultimately why our death wins, I think. But I'm not. I don't know. Actually, I
Interesting.
sort of just
That's
made that up,
interesting.
but
Well, yeah.
because otherwise, I don't know what I was expecting from the death. Because like, right, our death is a skeleton with a hood, a scythe, and a horse. So like, what's the
He's
person?
original Cook.
Yeah, yeah, he's the OG. Like, and what I was genuinely curious to see, like, what would his replacement, devoid of personality, like, what would it be? But then it was just kind of like a slightly less fun version of original death. Yeah, like New Coke, like crap death. So yeah, I think he was trying to say something about something with that, I guess. But it made for a cool fight anyway.
Yeah, I got really excited. I think it's probably one of my favorite moments. Actually, it's still very fresh in my mind.
Yeah,
Um,
sure. I think the point is that the universe does have a personality. That does feel like something that kind of comes back on the light touch again and again. And that to ignore that or to try to suppress that or to try to ignore that is like defeats the purpose of living. I think there's something that feels vaguely in the right area. The academics awaken in a living mall. The combination harvester learns the value of a 3/8 Scripley. Ridcully decides, no man left behind. There is a closing down sale. Death faces off against the Dark Servants and strikes a bargain with Azrael. Mrs. Flitworth receives intimate gifts. Bildor gets one last dance. Windle Poons gets to know who he is before he knows who he was. Death of Rats can't ride a cat. Maybe some kind of dog. Some good stuff here. I couldn't possibly read Closing Down Sale
it's
misspelled
pronounced
the way I was.
Closnig down slae.
Yeah, I should have prepped that. Yeah, I liked that. That is for me actually one of the creepiest parts of the whole mall thing. Is it like, yeah, trying to communicate through text and all the like creepily misspelled stuff. Like, I'm so on the fence about that stuff. Um, but
Yeah,
the combination harvester, we haven't really talked about actually up until now.
yeah.
That's about to meet its doom. So
So, and is this New Death as well? Another New Death? Or the combo harvester?
yeah, well, that's the metaphor, isn't it? Yeah, it's a good one. Makes sense. There's
And
something else going on there, which is we saw it a little bit in moving pictures, but a little bit more here. Like a little bit of technology creeping into the disc world, a little bit of recognizable modern technology, and that's all slowly building towards some interesting stories. So yeah, again, this is one that I had missed previously, so it was interesting to see that. What is a 3/8 Gripply? So I assume it's 3/8 of an inch. What is a Gripply?
Hmm. I did not research this.
No, me neither. Not very well. I'm a little bit handy. I fixed a vacuum cleaner recently. I was quite proud of that.
Oh, well, yeah, that's a gleeful feeling that.
But I don't think I could fix a combine harvester. I'll just putting that out.
No,
Putting that out there.
there's a photo my parents have of me very young, sitting on a combine harvester.
Cool. You
We
gotta
have
love it. Like
some friends out in the country and visited them, and I got a seat up there. Very exciting stuff.
indeed, little boys love big farm machines. All the Mrs. Flitworth stuff, the intimate gifts, as you elegantly describe them. I enjoyed that a lot. That it reminded me more of Mort Death, you know, where he's like he's trying to make his way in the world, you know, when just Death trying to interact with humans, just trying to do normal stuff, you know, is great. Like I love all the pool and darts. I love him when he's the cook in Hagrid's. I remember in Mort, I loved him when he went to the careers officer. So like having him trying to buy flowers and chocolates and stuff is just great.
Let's talk about the closnig down sleigh.
Oh yeah.
And we haven't actually talked much in detail about this shopping mall, which I think the maybe Lovecraftian level
Yeah,
with the
yeah,
sticky
yeah.
tower elevator and the sort of honeycomb type shop sells.
Imagery wise, as I say, like it sort of stays with me a bit, and I, it's super creepy. And I like that he is. I mean, again, we saw it in moving pictures. You know, trying to wrap the Lovecraftian horror inside mundane day to day stuff, and that elevates it for sure. Like that definitely makes it creepier. Definitely makes it scarier. Because I don't necessarily buy the overall conceit of this as well as I did for moving pictures. I'm not as invested in it, but like yes, from like an imagery point of view, it's a shame actually it's not as well integrated into the story because it is something that has stayed with me. Like you said, the elevators and like the way that the writing, the organic kind of writing, and it is super creepy. Like it definitely is,
Yeah.
and the way
I
that they
found the
fight it,
setup
you
of
know.
it a bit fragmented where they appeared
Yeah,
to be on the university grounds in one moment, and then the next it was like there's a hole, and then there's a whole subterranean escape, and it wasn't quite clear to me with the at what point we entered the underground. So it was
yeah,
probably the
agreed.
later half of those descriptions that kind of worked for me, and I still wasn't sure what was going on. I think this is where the multitude of characters really lets down the
Yeah,
action. And yeah. And so you
agreed.
said the vampire couple didn't do much for you, and similarly.
No, and yeah, the fact that they're all along for the ride, it does definitely slow this down, and like as I say, it sort of makes it all feel a little bit less coherent because I'm not really quite sure what the conceit is, but I do like a horde, like a hive of shopping trolleys, like shopping trolleys acting like the aliens in Aliens is funny. It's one of my
Yeah.
favorite. Well, it's
Yeah,
probably my favorite
it
movie.
did occur to me this would be one that would really benefit from some kind of film or animation adaptation. And actually, just while that's come up, there is an adaptation of about 7 minutes of Reaper Man, pretty
That's right.
much just as a an introduction to the Discworld. There's not much in terms of serious story, but it was made by Cosgrove Hall, who brought us Danger Mouse and Duckula.
That's right.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's yeah, you search it on YouTube. There's about 7 minutes, and it's quite enjoyable.
I mean, this would be insane, like to bring to the screen. Well, they sort of did it. I mean, I mentioned it earlier. They did sort of do something similar to this in Stranger Things, and it's horrific, like in all the ways that it's intended to be horrific, you know. But to have like a horde of shopping trolleys running through that, and wizards throwing fireballs, and a boogeyman putting himself in the mix, I think would be quite something for sure. As a spectacle on its own, it does seem crazier than like the 50-foot woman and all the stuff at the end of moving pictures, but it's not like, except for the shopping trolleys, like there's nothing within the mall itself that I feel like lands like a really good gag. Like I know you like the closnig down sleigh, but like I found that a bit creepier than I did funny. I think you know.
There's quite a use of textual anomalies, or in this handwritten writing, and then Azrael's no, which I saw the on the right hand side of my page. I saw the full stop,
Mm.
and yeah, just got a peek and knew to put it away and not to look at it until I got there.
One of the advantages, perhaps, of the digital edition is that I didn't have the opportunity to do that. Yeah, and I guess it does make sense that getting the Azrael, that like that's where the final confrontation for that arc is ultimately going to have to be.
Yeah,
And
that
it's
that sold me well. I quite enjoyed that.
yeah, it's for how kind of busy and uh, the mall stuff is like that. There's sort of a nice simplicity to that confrontation between Death and Azrael, and that Death kind of earned his place, earned his role. And we yeah, I like that. There's, as I
Yeah,
say, it
there's actually
contrasted well.
I agree, um, but also a little bit disagree, because there's quite a lot of moving parts
Mm.
around the death stuff that all work and are all. In fact, the death stuff is probably a cue to how the shopping mall stuff should be done. You think of the three scribbly of the death of
Yeah.
rats, who is the legal loophole of a sort. Um,
Yes.
you get
Indeed.
the
Yes.
references to the clock, the fact you've got Bildor and Death at the same time as two different beings.
Yeah.
There's so many little add-ons to the Death storyline. But even before we get to the townsfolk, that are just perfect in their
Yeah.
execution.
You're right. It's
Pardon
much.
the
It's
pun.
more. It is more coherent in terms of all those little building blocks. They all fit together much better. I would agree with that. Actually. Yeah.
And then, so I want to, yeah, also talk about Bildor and Mrs. Flitworth, if it's time for that.
Of course.
Is that section was just sheer beautiful poetry when Bill's saying his last goodbyes. It's funny. It's very touching. There's a lot of it, and it's significantly different from the whole Indiana Jones of gifting goodbye to the townsfolk, the last dance, and then Renata Flitworth's reunion with her husband. That's, yeah, I don't know how many pages that is, but it's a lovely, like almost like a short story, but it fits in perfectly, of course.
Like I think I warmed to Mrs. Flitworth as the pacing dictated it. I think it was Terry's intention. That as the relationship develops between Bill and Mrs. Flitworth, the readers invited into that sort of at the similar pace. So by the time you reach this big emotional crescendo, like it's so well executed that you, as you say, you're completely satisfied by it, even though it could, if it wasn't handled just quite right, all the flowers and the massive diamond and all like that could take you out of it because it's so silly, but it doesn't. It feels totally right for their relationship. They this kind of uneasy, eccentric relationship that they've developed throughout the story, where she kind of knows who he is, but she pretends that she doesn't. And this is like the perfect ending to it. It's great. Yeah, absolutely. That whole arc makes the book worthwhile. And it's the book's Reaper Man. It's about death. This is his arc within it. So like that alone is worth the price of admission for me.
Windle Poons gets good closure too. I will miss
Yeah,
him. I knew him.
yeah, for
Um,
sure.
what a
Yeah,
guy, and actually a hero, I think, by the end of the story.
yeah, totally. And it's nice to see a slightly more well-rounded wizard character, maybe in comparison to say Rincewind or whatever, who's not quite even though he's like a friggin' zombie or whatever, like he's
Yeah.
not as heightened, like in terms of his personality, and there's more kind of introspection and there's more pathos within him and stuff. So like, but yeah, by the time we lose him, we've lost a friend, I guess, you know.
And this is another monster subversion. The wolf that turns into a man. You've got the zombie that has a new lease of life as a result of being zombified. His thoughts are quicker, his mobility is in
It's a good
place.
point. Yeah.
He sees things coming to get. He's got a new appreciation for
Yeah.
stuff and things.
Yeah, I totally failed to articulate that point earlier, but there is something really funny in the idea that like Windle was so old and like so deteriorated that becoming a zombie was like a step up for him. That's a good gag.
Yeah. I really I want more Wendell. I really do, but just gotta let him go.
It's a shame, but I think
Yeah.
yeah, you know, because we the punch was pulled with Gaspode as you mentioned at the start, but the way that this Windows story is constructed, I mean, obviously it had to end this way, and like you say, we knew it was coming, but it's handled it really well, so it's a good moment of catharsis, I think.
Yeah. We get a lot of there's some really interesting points where he's contrasted with against the other wizards who, decide at one point they're gonna kill him. Um it cuts quite a vulnerable and sympathetic figure in that. Yeah, he's although the academics come back to fight for him and to get his back. There's very much a sense that he's operating outside of that. He's operating as a loner, with some abandonment.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure. And I guess
he's
we've kind of
just
seen that fish out of water at school stuff or at the university with Esk in the past. And I've been reading the biography, Terry's biography recently, and there does seem to be a sense that he didn't feel like he fit in particularly well at school. So it feels like that might be the origin behind some of these university stories where you have, like you said, a fish out of water within that academic setting. So I think it's been interesting to kind of get that insight.
Wendell's exit, where he is. It's a reprise of his conversation with Sergeant Cohen. I think just helps. I'm stood over Ankh-Morpork's bridge with its mud below,
Yeah.
less water, and it helps sort of earth and ashes to ashes, I guess, that connection to the ordinary of Ankh-Morpork
Mm.
and
Yeah.
its terrible smell.
Yeah. I've mentioned it before. Any gag about the river, anytime that gets worked in, especially if it gets worked into a big story beat like that, I love it.
So, do you have a favorite quote or bright spot?
Yeah. Well, I've got a favorite quote. And again, it's sort of fitting in the theme of me catching up on stuff about Discworld that I thought I knew, but apparently didn't because I hadn't read this book or hadn't read it properly. My favorite quote is: light thinks it travels faster than anything, but it is wrong. No matter how fast light travels, it finds the darkness has always got there first and is waiting for it. Which is it's a good line. It's very Pratchett. It's one that I had heard before, but I obviously hadn't placed it in the right context because I hadn't read this book. So yeah, so to keep in that theme of me kind of filling in those gaps, death of rats, auditors, rage, all that stuff.
Yeah,
Finding the right place for that quote was also quite a cool revelation as well.
spot on. Mine was pretty much the minute I read it, I decided it was a clear victor, and I'm sure a lot of people have it as a favorite. It was later that the story of Wendell Poons really came to an end. If story means all that he did and caused and set in motion. In Ramtop's village, where they dance a real Morris dance, for example, they believe that no one is finally dead until the ripples they cause in the world die away, until the clock he wound up winds down, until the wine she made has finished its ferment, until the crop they planted is harvested. The span of someone's life, they say, is only the core of their actual existence.
A good one. Yeah, and it's such a core Discworld idea without getting into it, but we use the handle on Twitter and stuff, Discworld GNU, and the GNU thing, which comes up in a later book, is a really concise summary, basically, of what you've just said. It's a really good motif for that, and I think it's one of the strongest kind of recurring motifs in the whole series. So there you go again, to sort of see it articulated so well for the first time in this book has been well worth me kind of going back and reading it for the first time properly. So nice one.
All right, before we push on, we've got some mail from our friend RoastyBunz.
Oh, cool.
So how do you deal with getting into a franchise with so much material? I sometimes find it amazingly overwhelming. I listen to albums, work, read books, play games, movies, and all that stuff. So I find it extremely hard to stick with a franchise. He talks about time and stuff. It's too daunting to even start, especially at the beginning. It's a very commercial sort of question, I feel.
Yeah, you go
There's
first.
a couple of levels to my answer. I think if we're dealing with big productions and they're terrible, I drop them. I don't have time to waste on waiting for a series to, get better in the second or third season. I've learned to sort of put my mind in a place where I just ignore the to be continued of things. I just have to disconnect. Maybe it's a punk mindset. Maybe I'm a creative snob. Who knows? And then we've also got, in the last 30 years, we've gone from like here in the UK, like 3 channels to
I mean, 30 years
tens of
ago
thousands.
we had 4 channels.
Maybe this was before your time, Pete.
Yeah, well, yeah, it is. But like, I'm nearly 40, so
So I think there's a problem there. It's too daunting to keep abreast of everything that's going on. There's also, more than any time in the past, there's better television, there's better fiction. So you really just have to be a bit mercenary. You can't afford even all the best, all the great stuff. You don't have the time to get through it. Heck, there's a number of classics sitting on my bookshelves that should have been the first order of business, really. I think just sort of accepting that fact and just coping with it. I'm not getting wedded to a franchise, but rather to the creative voices within that.
yeah, that's good advice for sure. And I think if you're talking about like TV shows, comics, and stuff, where you have multiple creators and that, you can be a bit choosier. I've struggled in the past big time with being a bit of a completionist. Of like, if I'm gonna read, say, like a big comic crossover event, if I'm going to like your Civil Wars or what have you like you got to read every issue of like every character, and it's just like Roasty says, it's overwhelming. And a series I'm trying to kind of work my way through at the moment is the Horus Heresy series of Warhammer 40K books, which is just like they just took the piss massively. Started with a trilogy of books to tell the story. Now they're like 50 plus books in the series, all these different writers and stuff. Uh, and in the past, I would have been kind of incapable of skipping a book in a series. Like, just it would have made my brain itchy. But with Horus Heresy, I'm just like, nah, I can't. And obviously, the internet and the communities are great for people telling you like what the must reads are, and if you like this, read that, without having to go through every single entry in a series. So no, I totally relate to that sort of sense of overwhelming, but I've just finally reached a point, as Andy says, where there's too much content and not enough time, and just trying to be a bit choosier, not feeling that I have to be a completionist anymore. And who knows, maybe I'll come back and fill in the gaps in that series in 20 years, like I'm doing now with Discworld. I don't think I'd.
Yeah, among the writers, fiction writers I talk with, everybody wants to do a series of books, and like I'm not, I don't have time to read your 6 books. Write one book that's self-contained, and if I'm really as into it as you think I am, then yeah, I'll do number 2, but I don't want to be given number 1 and told to be continued. You know,
yeah, because then it almost,
you've got to be really confident for that stuff.
Yeah, big time. And I mean, and we're all sitting here waiting for the winds of winter still, and it's like it
10
does the
years
fact
later,
that if it ever comes out, and that is a big if it does, the fact that he may not stick the landing, he might not mess it up as badly as the TV writers did, but he may not stick the landing, does make that previous 7-book investment feel like sort of a waste of time, doesn't it? You know,
yeah,
so yeah, I get it. That's it, I guess. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know what else to say about that, but it's a good question. Something I was really, really apt. Something I've just been thinking about a lot. I literally last week was like, right, I have to start skipping books in this series. I can't read all these books. So yeah, that question came up at a really interesting time for me.
Interesting. So anything to plug, PJ?
Not that I can talk about at the moment,
No.
unfortunately.
All
Hopefully
NDA.
soon. Yeah, hopefully soon.
I have started a new novel on my Patreon, patreon.com/Andy Luke. It's a comedy thriller spy thing. It's great fun. It's called Half Baked Alaska.
It's a great title. That's an absolutely fantastic title.
I want to say special thanks to a few of my top patrons, Arslan, Hyder Ali, Art K, and particularly Ian Lawther, who also goes halvers on the Zoom bill, which allows PJ and I to do this. So big thanks to Ian.
Thanks, Ian.
We should be thanking more often. You the man.
Indeed.
Where to find us? Our main hosting page is anchor.fm. Well, it's now called Spotify for podcasters.com, but that's not as catchy. You could still use the old anchor.fm. / I've never read Discworld. As PJ mentioned, we're at Discworld GNU on Twitter and Facebook.
Which is now X. Therefore, everything's changing names. The world is leaving us behind. X, we're x.com/Discworld GNU. Awful, terrible stuff.
We are
Put things back
original
the way
Coca-Cola. We
are
have the heroin. Or is it cocaine? Yeah, we have the cocaine.
Porque Nostos.
We are original Coca-Cola. We have the cocaine.
No comment on that. Right, so sum it up for us. Do the thing.
I have read Discworld.
It's been so long. It's been so long we've forgotten how to.
Discworld.
It's been so long we forgot how to end the podcast. I had never read this Discworld. Now I have. On to the next one. Should we do that, or what is the next one?
I think the next one is Witches Abroad.
Ooh, back to the witches. Always.
Yes. So the witches are. I kind of know that it's going to be good.
Yeah. I feel I might be in similar territory here with some of these early series books where like I've maybe got Equal Rights and Witches Abroad mixed up in the past. So now that I know I made that mistake with Reaperman, this is going to be interesting. I'm not 100% sure whether I've read this or not.
It sounds to me very much like the witches go on holiday.
That does sound familiar, actually.
Which could be fun.
Yeah.
We'll see. Trips, egg and crest sandwiches.
Sounds great. Granny be all over that stuff. Cool. All right. Looking forward to that.
All right. Thanks for joining us. Please spread the word, and we'll see you next month.
See you next time. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.